Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Unclassified number 11. This is our 11th episode, and we have a lot to talk about today. We have a new president in the United States. We have stuff happening in Gaza. We've got the Houthis. We have the Mexican drug cartels, Ukraine, the Gulf of America. We got all kinds of stuff happening. And remember, if you like this, to like it on YouTube, comment on Spotify, also comment on YouTube. And follow and subscribe. It really helps out the show, helps us grow, and, it gives us more incentives to go a little faster on this. But to start us off the bat, last episode we asked our audience on Spotify through the polls, what do you give President Biden? Because Preston and I both rated him. We graded him a C. And the Spotify audience gave Joe Biden, 56% of them gave him a C, 20% gave him a B, and 20% gave him an F.
In fairness, C is kind of a cop-out answer, and that's why I took it.
It really is. But the other, I believe, 4% went A or D. And you know what they say about C presidents. They are lost to the sands of time. Nobody cares about the average.
Were there any Fs?
Yeah. 20% gave him Fs.
20? Okay, all right. Wow.
20% gave him a B, 20% gave him an F.
That's going to weigh down the average. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
way down the average.
But to start off the bat here, we have a new president. You watched the inauguration, I assume?
Parts of it. I tuned in ready to watch it because they said, it starts at, 11 o'clock or something. And by, 11:45, you still had the commentators, introducing everybody. So I was off doing other things, but kind of paid a bit of attention, yeah. Saw the Naval Academy Glee Club was there. So,
shout out.
Hate to see it, but, yeah.
West
Point was probably busy.
Yeah, it was a good inauguration, and it happened in the Capitol building, and it's unclear why. I thought it was because it was cold, but then people say, no, it's not because it's cold. Others say it was security reasons, and I was like, that's... the United States government can protect the president of the United States in its own capital, right? That's not an issue. So I don't know why it was moved inside. Maybe Trump just liked the aesthetic better. There are people saying he was worried about the crowd size, but he did sell 200,000 tickets. So I don't think he could be that worried about it, right? Anyways, he gave this speech. Oh, go ahead.
I think the security concerns are legitimate at this point. I mean, you have to keep in mind we just had a handful of legitimate assassination attempts against Trump. We haven't seen that in a long time. So a very different environment there in D.C. for the inauguration than a random speech he's giving somewhere around the country. But it does present a lot more security challenges than if you do it inside. So, I wouldn't be too crazy shocked if this kind of sets the standard going forward, and we see more indoor events like this as opposed to outdoor. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know. I mean, it was a cool look being inside. But I just think, I don't know, I like the outside look better, right? I like how, you get to look across the National Mall and the big scale of the building behind them. But anyways, he gave this speech that was, at times it was optimistic, at other times it was not. And then afterwards there were parts of his speech that he wanted to say, but they're like, no, you can't say that. So then he went downstairs and spoke to an audience of Logan Paul and Theo Von, and he played the greatest hits, Hillary, crooked Hillary, Pelosi's a criminal, blah, blah. But the reason we're doing this recap is because he said, and I was shot, and speaking of getting shot, Steve Scalise over here, so for listeners who don't listen, Steve Scalise is the Republican House whip, and he was shot while practicing for the congressional softball game by I think it was a Bernie guy. Anyways, he was he was in rough condition. But Trump goes, speaking of getting shot, Steve Scalise, he needed so much blood, and his wife, she was a mess. She just wouldn't stop crying. But Steve, he was in rough shape, and Steve's sitting there dude, what is going on? He just straight face, nod oh yeah. Yeah, remember the worst day of your life, Steve? Yeah, speaking of him, let's everyone talk about that. But anyways, so now Trump has been president for 5 days, and it has been 5 days. It has been a 5 days fitting of him. He is the TV president, and it is, something's always happening. But To get us going here before we get into Ukraine and Gaza, have you heard the rumors about President Obama?
I generally keep up with. I at this point have a hard time keeping up with rumors. I also have a hard time on the surface figuring out if something is real or not. Like, is it even a real rumor, or is it something that user 74832 said on TikTok and now it's spun out of control into a thing? So I don't know, Ben. Maybe I am, maybe I'm not. Which rumor are you talking about?
So President Obama. Now this rumor, it's been supposedly been whispered around DC. I heard it in December, and I just didn't think anything of it because, like, whatever. But now Megyn Kelly's talked about it. You've had people on Barstool talk about it, which, I mean, obviously very reputable sources.
Barstool,
but it's, the Puck News people, who I would say are pretty reliable. The Puck News people are saying that they've been hearing it too. And the rumor is that President Barack Obama is having an affair with Jennifer Aniston. Now, we don't really get in the gossip here, but this does seem notable. And let me ask you this. Do you think a divorce, because supposedly he's getting divorced from Michelle. Now, I should clarify that this is, none of this is confirmed at all. But, I don't know. Can a divorce destroy a legacy? I mean, Obama's whole thing, he's a big wife guy, huge wife guy. He always says the most popular thing I ever did in my presidency was marry Michelle. Right. Does Barack Obama getting divorced hurt his legacy? I think maybe. He's not a big wife guy anymore.
If I'm being honest, my care meter on this is pretty low, like across the board.
That's fair.
Like this, so I'll follow your lead.
Speaking of BO, though, Barack Obama, a Republican congressman introduced a constitutional amendment to give Trump a third term yesterday, but hilariously, it comes with an anti-Obama clause. So it states that only presidents who serve 2 non-consecutive terms can run for a third term, but any president who's already finished 2 complete terms can't run for a third term. Which is, Democrats have always joked. They've always said, well, if, they ever lift the term limits, then we'll just run Obama and we'll banish Trump to shadow realm or whatever. And they're seeming to say, yeah, we agree. Only Trump can have the third term. They don't have the votes for this, but it is a little funny that they decide to include the anti-Obama clause in it.
That'd be anti a lot of people, right? Because the way they're kind of phrasing it is, the way they're kind of phrasing it is, if you're popular enough to become president twice, or well-liked enough to become president twice, but not so popular to get it back-to-back. Like, there had to have been an issue in there at some point. That's kind of an interesting way of putting it together.
That is a good point, yeah.
Let's shift over to some international news. We can stick with some...
move the things that matter, yes.
So Trump designated... There's a bunch of foreign terrorist designations. I think that's the place to start here. Let's go with the Houthis to begin with, because this was an interesting one. We'll kind of move through it. I do want to come back to talk about the cartels in Mexico here before long. But Trump designated the Houthis a foreign terrorist organization, redesignated them. So added them to the list, added them back to the list. And I saw some confusion here right when it happened because Biden, a couple days before he left office, listed them as a specially designated global terrorist organization. Those are 2 different lists. I'm not here to defend it. It's just the thing, and that's what it is. So,
what's the difference?
Relatively nuanced. I've got a good article here pulled up from Foundation for Defense of Democracies that actually laid it out in like a little infographic. So, by and large, FTO versus SDGT. FTO, Foreign Terrorist Organization designation, gives the U.S. government more tools and more flexibility to go after members and support for these organizations. That's the long and short of it. Some other details here. Victims can sue for civil damages. They can sue a FTO. They cannot sue, I guess, SDGT. A foreign terrorist organization.
What's the point of that?
It's happened. Yeah, I don't know that that's necessarily... That's at the top of the list. I don't know that I would have put that one at the top of the list. There's some other ones in here that seem more important. It bans a foreign terrorist organization. Anybody associated with them is banned from U.S. visa issuance and admission to the United States. That is not the case under specially designated terrorist groups, which, I don't know, seems like maybe that one should apply across the board, but it doesn't. So that's a step in the right direction. And then there was, it changes the legal threshold for criminal prosecution of people providing material support. So essentially it makes it easier to go after people supporting FTOs financially or however they might be doing so. It's a little bit harder when they're a specially designated terrorist group. So it doesn't, the way I kind of read that is FTO is a step up.
Right.
Like there's more tools available, but nonetheless, it's the Houthis, and the Houthis are doing Houthi things. They don't really care. What they did in response was release this tweet storm saying campaign that America is evil and listed out this whole reason of things to tweet as to why the United States is bad. So no really surprise there from the Houthis. But yeah, good news. I think it's a positive step. Look, they have caused significant damage to international shipping and international trade based off what they're doing in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. They have not been deterred. It's unfortunately for President Biden, it's going to go down, I think, as one of those quotes that gets used for a long time. But they asked him about striking the Houthis, and he said, "Is it working? No. Is it going to continue? Yes." And it's just like that has been that's been the policy towards the Houthis, and It's good to see some movement in that direction. It started under Biden just a few weeks ago when they labeled them a specially designated terrorist group, and it continued under Trump as the foreign terrorist organization. Good. We need to have some sort of plan there around the Houthis, and it doesn't seem like we have, really, to this point.
They used to be on the foreign terror organization list, and then Biden removed them. There was some group that wanted it lifted for humanitarian reasons. I don't know. They lifted it, and then like 6 months later, a year later, now they are just shooting everything that passes by them. So
yeah, there was an event.
Not denying yeah.
He removed them before the October 7th attacks. So it was kind of an idea of trying, the whole, and this is a regular conversation with so many of these governments and entities around the world is, what if we ease sanctions? Will that bring them back into the fold, right? Make them want to be like the cool kids on the block, and they can come to the good meetings and everything. And that was kind of the idea, is let's lay off, see if they change their behavior. And we laid off. They didn't really change anything. Honestly, the United States just doesn't pay a whole lot of attention to whatever is happening in Yemen. But then October 7th happened, and the Houthis were like, now we are going to defend the people of Gaza by shooting everything in the Red Sea.
Which, is working so well.
They would say it is. They've declared victory a couple different times. Yeah, the Hamas has thanked them, said that, part of the reason that Hamas was successful in Gaza is due to the Houthis, which we should get to that. Let's talk Gaza, Hamas, ceasefire, all of that. Since we last talked, the ceasefire has gone into effect. We've got a new president. A lot of things are happening. So the Gaza ceasefire has been holding for the most part. There have been select strikes carried out by Israel when they watch Hamas militants walk into firing points with rockets ready to go. They do conduct those strikes and continue to do so. By and large, Israel has withdrawn from a lot of portions of the Gaza Strip. 3 Israeli hostages, living female hostages, were exchanged last weekend for 90 Palestinian prisoners. That is set to continue this weekend, with 4 more Israelis set to be released in exchange for an unknown number of Palestinian prisoners. There's ratios they're using here for whether it's a woman, a child, a male that's being released from the Israeli side, whether it's a soldier, and then from the Palestinian side, if their age, the sentence that they're serving, if it's a violent crime. So it's hard to say if it's going to be 4 to 120 or 4 to 60, but it's going to be a lot more Palestinians released for those 4 Israelis. It's on track, seems to be holding. The minute it went into effect, Hamas came out into the streets celebrating, chanting, wearing their uniforms, headbands on, some chanting slogans talking about bringing violence upon the Jews. So, it's not resolved, but technically the ceasefire is still in place.
Do you think – so what's happening in the West Bank? Has anything happened there, or –
Yeah. So Gaza slowed down, and then Israel's like, now it's time. Let's go to war in the West Bank, which is kind of not a fair oversimplification. There's been a lot going on in the West Bank for a long time, before October 7th. And generally speaking, it's kind of been on the back burner of this conflict because the threat there to Israel just has not been as intense as, say, the actual fighting in Gaza, or, of course, the threat that Lebanese Hezbollah posed to the north, and then IRGC and Iran. So the West Bank has been considered one of these 7 fronts that Israel has been fighting on, and they've been conducting pretty regular counterterrorism raids, airstrikes, arresting individuals, to include Hamas operatives in the West Bank, and Hamas regularly praises their fighters there. So, like, there is a Hamas element there. And that is where these Palestinians are being released. So when they come out of Israeli jails, they don't go back to Gaza. They go to the West Bank. And Hamas, in a sense, is kind of using that as a way to leverage their ranks and push these people into their fight. So what we've seen in the last couple of days, as some Israeli forces have withdrawn from Gaza, or all kind of moving to the outskirts, we've seen an uptick in Israeli operations in the West Bank. Pretty significant counterterrorism operations there, in Jenin especially, up north. And kind of the look of it right now is that it just freed up some assets for Israel to move around. The situation in the West Bank has not gotten any better since October 7th, and it might just be time that they're going to start trying to navigate that situation and round up as many, militia members, anti-Israeli groups as they can in the next few weeks and months here.
Wow. So would you say that the situation is calmer than it previously was, or are we seeing an uptick in tension?
Across the board, if you had to weigh everything, I would say net calmer. The reason I would say that is because the fighting in Gaza has stopped. The fighting in the north has stopped, although it sounds like right now Israel's not going to meet their 60-day obligation to pull all forces out of southern Lebanon, which they say is because the Lebanese armed forces are not meeting their obligations. So either way, you've got 2 fronts that have essentially died down. So even though there has been a spike in the West Bank, it's nowhere near the level of violence that we've seen on those other 2 fronts. So net, less violence. But things have escalated in the West Bank.
Wow. And so do you think that there's going to be an operation here on Iran by Israel? There was talk that they were going to hit the nuclear strike or the nuclear sites while Trump was being sworn in. And that either was fake news or postponed or something. That was posted by, who reported? I sent you that. Sky News, Arabia, maybe? And they had that, and so that never happened. But now they're moving an Iran hawk onto the Iran file. And do you think this comes eventually during this term, or do you think Israel's going to chill out for a little bit? Because Iran said if we wanted a nuclear weapon, we would have one by now, which I do think they're telling the truth on that. I mean, they've been days away from a nuclear weapon for 14 years now.
Yeah, it does seem like there's been some mixed signals in the Trump administration. Across the board, very pro-Israel, but the Iran hawks have kind of come and gone. It seems like at times there's been some more hawkish members towards Iran, and they're kind of catching some blowback from what I can see, where people are kind of upset about that. Like, wait a minute, this is not what Trump and team promised, talking about no new wars and focusing on the home front. Now you've got somebody justifying why going after the Iranian leadership would be the right move. So it seems like mixed signals right now related to Iran, but I would say it does feel like any sort of chains that the Israeli government felt was on them have been lifted. And I think that's part of the reason that you've seen them go into the West Bank with force. Like, I just don't think they're concerned at all about the U.S. shutting off any sort of arms shipments or condemning them or doing anything other than really saying, like, you got what you need? Is there anything else we can do? Cool. I just think this is so far down the list of Trump's priorities right now. Iran might be a little bit higher, but I think it's kind of gloves off for Israel at this point.
Interesting. And so what do you shake out of it? Give me your 6-month prediction. In 6 months, is their fighting going to be intensified in the West Bank? Does Iran still have their sights? Or is there peace in the Middle East for the first time ever, and Gaza becomes this real estate place that Trump called it, or whatever he said?
Beautiful territory, beautiful property, something like that. Have you seen
Yeah,
pictures out of
right.
Gaza recently? Some of it? It's
Uh,
rubble, just complete
yeah,
rubble.
yeah. They need
All
to
right, so
rebuild.
yeah, next 6 months. There's no way. There's too many moving pieces here to try to make any sort of legitimate prediction. There's a couple that I'll key in on. I think the Houthis will have been handled. The issues in the
Handled.
Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Yep, I don't know what that means. I don't know if that means they remain in power and there's some sort. There's a lot of leverage points with the Houthis right now. Right, this is a government that is struggling to feed its own people, and they're outmatched militarily in like every possible sense, and they've got people that don't like them in every direction, and their key backers, Iran, are losing their main proxies left and right. So there's a lot of levers that could be pulled via the Houthis. I think we're going to see some sort of resolution there that doesn't automatically mean an increase in military strikes. I think the Red Sea issue is going to be largely resolved inside of the next 6 months. A part of that is because I do think the Trump administration will take a different path. Another part of that is we've just seen, again, what might be the Iranian regime at their weakest point in a long time. So, they essentially lost Hamas. They lost Hezbollah. The Shiite militias that they back across Syria and Iraq, a lot of them fled Syria when Assad fell. They've not gone back in from Iraq. The Houthis are catching increasing flack. Like, I just think the IRGC is probably hurting more now than they have in a long, long time and might be vulnerable to maybe some pushback inside of their country, certainly some external influence. So I think to bring it all the way back around, I think the Houthi situation will be largely resolved. I'm not going to touch the Israel, West Bank, Gaza with a 10-foot pole. I feel like that could go any direction at any point. But I think there's a real chance that we start to see some progress in Iran. Again, just for those other reasons, they're struggling. They're having a hard time keeping the heat on for their own citizens. This is an oil-producing country. Like, what is happening over there? 6 months is a little fast to say that something is going to happen, but I would say we're going to start seeing some progress in the right direction about, when I say regime change, I know that the negative connotations that come with that, understandably so, but that's kind of the best way to frame it. That doesn't mean like an external actor comes in and like forcibly changes the regime, but I think it's entirely possible we start to see a shift in Iran sometime in the near future.
Interesting. And so, going up a little bit north, Jolani, he congratulated Donald Trump on his victory in inauguration. Thoughts?
Jolani's kind of been a master. So when we look back in the last few years, Zelensky has kind of mastered the art of media, right? Reaching the right audiences at the right times, knowing what to say and how to say it. I'd put Trump in the similar category, right? The guy knows how to use media. In the Middle East, Israel seems to have been tripping over themselves from day one, trying to figure that piece out. I still don't think they have. They've gotten a lot better. But the media aspect from their side has been pretty rough, and they've regularly lost the information space in a lot of ways. Jolani is a media mastermind at this point. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but he's doing a really good job. So this is, old Al-Qaeda Islamic State, and the dude put on a suit, combed his hair, and is now meeting dignitaries in Damascus. And like, these people would not have met with Al-Qaeda or Islamic State, or even people that are associated with those organizations today. But he's done a really good job of putting forward a positive, moderate image, maybe is the best way to put it. Now, it wouldn't be shocking at all to see Jolani and Trump talking, not necessarily meeting in person quite yet, but talking. I wouldn't write that off because there's still a lot of security concerns in Syria, and there's the reports that I'm seeing now are hard to take seriously because it seems like there's been a lot of progress in Syria, and the only people that I'm seeing really speak out about like the Jolani regime at this point cracking down on minorities are folks that were also kind of Assadists, if you will. Like, they were terrified that, to them, Assad is the best answer for Syria. So it's hard to take them seriously when they say all of these crimes are happening, you just can't see them, they're being hidden. I'm not seeing that right now. It looks like HTS has essentially transitioned into this interim government, and again, it's not going to be a Western democracy by a long shot, but they appear to be holding their own at this point.
Could you see Jolani being the Trump whisperer?
No. In what sense?
There are a few. There are a few Trump whisperers around the world. We know Emmanuel Macron of France is like the Trump whisperer somehow. The two of them get along. And then the other Trump whisperer was Shinzo Abe, who is, fly high space cowboy, right? And those are really the only two that could ever really speak to him. I mean, of course, you could say Putin, but I'm not sure Putin's a Trump whisperer. And I guess maybe Zelensky is now, right? Because Zelensky seems to have flipped.
I think Trump likes. I think Trump likes Zelensky.
They got off on the wrong foot with the blackmail impeachment thing. I think now they're buddies. I think, or at least
we've all been there.
Yeah, we've all tried to blackmail someone and got impeached by Congress. Yes, it happens. It happened to my buddy Connor in high school. Anyway, so do you think Jolani will, if they do meet, he'll be the Trump whisperer and Trump becomes Syria's? He becomes the Lion of Syria. Jolani says, Trump, you come here, you'll be the Lion of Syria.
Starts opening up McDonald's left and right, new Trump hotel in Damascus, turns the Russian naval base into a resort. Oh, I'm about it.
If Trump went around calling himself the Lion of Syria, that would be the funniest thing he's ever done. That is something he should do. So do you think Jolani will bring the Donald to Damascus or meet with him in Tel Aviv somewhere if Israel would have him? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot that could happen there. I don't think Syria matters enough to Trump. If Jolani's smart, he does kind of that appealing to Trump in a way and opens up like ways for the United States to benefit now that he's in charge. I mean, we've seen that's kind of the way that foreign leaders are able to interact best with Trump is like, here's what we can offer you that you can take back to the American people. And there's certainly a way to do that in Syria. So I don't know. I don't think I'd call him the Trump whisperer just because I think Syria is so far down the list in terms. I mean, the other countries you're talking about, Japan and France, right? I think Syria is pretty far down the list in terms of what Trump thinks is important. But Ukraine might be. I do think he likes Zelensky. You want to get into what's going on up there?
Yes. So the Donald released a tweet. He was kind of, at any time on the campaign trail, he was both for and against military aid to Ukraine, against all kind of aid to Ukraine. And then in December, he said we're going to stop all aid. But then he met with Trump, the first Trump whisperer, Emmanuel Macron, and he told him, okay, I'll continue the aid, but NATO needs to increase defense spending to 5%. And now Trump releases this tweet, and he says, if Vladimir Putin doesn't negotiate an end to the war, I'm going to punish him with taxes, tariffs, and sanctions. Which we love the attitude. This is what we need. We love the attitude. However, we don't do a lot of trade. We don't really do any trade with Russia. So taxes and tariffs aren't going to work. And they also have like a ton of sanctions. So, but if you can apply more sanctions, that'd be good. But then Trump said something really insightful at Davos, I thought, which was that he said, if we flood the market with oil, then Russia's economy will collapse because most of their money comes from oil revenue. And I think maybe he's onto something there. But at the end of his threat in this tweet, or I guess it's the truth, he said, we can either do this the easy way or the hard way. And I was like, whoa. Okay, hold on. That's crazy. What are you talking about? And it's hard to know what the hard way means, right? I assume it means military aid, maybe. Maybe it means flooding the market with oil to kill the economy, or maybe it means direct U.S. military action. It's hard to know. But it seems as though, and I'm sure this will age like milk, because I'm seeing that Putin now saying that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump and that he loves Donald Trump so much right now in a press conference. So hopefully Trump does. I don't think he's naive. I think he likes being flattered, but I don't think he's a fool when someone's flattering him. And I think hopefully I'm right, and Trump becomes also the Lion of Ukraine. So
Lion of Kharkiv.
I don't know when. The Lion of Kharkiv, and maybe he will figure that out. But yeah, that is happening there. What are your thoughts on it?
I like the approach. As Trump is putting this out, telling Putin like we can do this the hard way or the easy way, it kind of drives home that we haven't done that in the past 4 years or the past 3 years since this war began. I don't recall instances outside of like, for what it's worth, I hate the government announcements of like we strongly condemn. It's made fun of online, and rightfully so. Like, what are you doing? What do you think this does? Who's sitting around there like, oh, son of a bitch, the U.S. condemned us. Like, we'll just keep doing the thing we were doing. So I hate that. If you remove the condemnations, and I know there were sanctions and things like that, but by and large, it felt like we were asking Russia, like, hey, would you stop? And if they don't stop, then we do sanctions. I kind of like the approach of, and I put this out on Twitter a while ago. I feel like it was one of those, every so often I say something there and just, it's not that I step in it, but like I just attract a lot of anger. I know that's shocking on a place like Twitter, but one of them was something along the lines of this, where it was like, I wish we would dictate terms instead of, it was around the Orishnik launch when Russia launched their fancy new missile, and we were all scared, like, oh my God, we have to stop doing anything that could upset Russia because they have nuclear weapons. And I was kind of ranting about, like, what happened here? Like, why are they not scared of us? Like, yes, nuclear war is scary across the board, but it seems like over and over again, we're just tiptoeing. Like, we have to be very careful not to upset Russia. Why aren't they tiptoeing? Why aren't they nervous about, like, hey, we better not cross this line, or F-22s are going to swoop in and eliminate what remains of the Black Sea Fleet? Like, where is their fear in making some of these decisions? And it feels like it hasn't been there. So it made me think a little bit of that. Maybe we're seeing a little bit more of, like, pressure, overt pressure on some of our adversaries around the world. So, I don't know. I'm kind of going off the rails there. But that's how I took that.
No, I agree with you. I think the fear of escalation from Russia is just really ridiculous. And they should be worried about what happens if we escalate. I fully agree. And I think there's no one better to do it than the Donald. So, yeah, I'm in full agreement with you. And I think easy way or the hard way is, I like that he kept it vague. It's such a crazy threat. Like, what is the hard way, right? If it's the easy way, tariffs and sanctions, or maybe the hard way is the tariffs and the sanctions. I don't know. But apparently Russia's advancing now. Can you tell me more about that? Is Ukraine losing the war, Preston?
Before getting into that, I will say the Russian media right now, their Telegram channels, they're all over the place. They don't know what to make of these recent statements from Trump. They've never been – there's kind of this narrative out there. It's funny because it kind of depends on if you liked Biden or if you liked Trump. You would find ways – people would find ways to say like, well, Putin wants Harris in office, or Putin wants Trump in office for reason A, B, C, and D. It was really mixed in the lead up to the election. The Russians found things they liked, and for example, I'll dig into this for a little bit. They viewed the Harris presidency to be a continuation of the Biden presidency. So there were Russian commentators that looked at that and said, good news, we don't think it's working. Bad news, we can expect that Ukraine is going to be receiving aid for the foreseeable future and probably going to be making a move into NATO. When they looked at the Trump presidency, they said, bad news, the dude is sometimes unpredictable and might actually send more weapons to Ukraine. Good news, he's talking about stopping the war by ending aid to Ukraine. So you kind of had him coming at it from all these different angles as to why one candidate or the other was preferred. In the last week or so, they've been all over the map. They can't, like, they're trying to, like, justify to themselves, like, no, it's okay. It's going to be okay. But when Trump comes out, like, up, down, and sideways with these threats, they don't know what to make of it. And there's still some hope on some of these channels that the threats will result in cutting off arms shipments, or that they result just in sanctions, because they're kind of mocking the sanctions at this point. They have done some harm. They will continue to do harm on the Russian economy, but when you talk sanctions with Russia at this point, they're kind of saying, like, what else are you going to do, man? Like, are you serious at this point? Layered on. So a lot of confusion on the Russian side around Trump, which I think is kind of everywhere.
I think if you're a foreign country, when it comes to like Obama, Biden versus Trump, I think like the calculus, like I think you kind of highlighted the calculus difference that Obama, Biden have these like ideologies, and within that ideology you can work within the rules, right? With Trump, it's high risk, high reward, right? If you can win him over, the future's yours, right? If Ukraine can win Trump, if Jolani can win Trump, the sky's the limit, right? We saw it with the UK where the EU was getting, I mean, obviously the UK is not in the EU anymore, but at the time it was mixed, right, before they fully left in. The EU was getting punished with sanctions and everything, and Trump was having, not sanctions, tariffs, and Trump was having all these rules written to where the UK was exempt from all of them. And so, really high risk, high reward, and you never know what he's going to do, but if you can win him over, he'll be your strongest soldier.
Now, turning to the situation on the ground, it's kind of been the same trend now for a long time in Ukraine. I think it was in August they pushed into Kursk. If you separate out that Kursk bubble, which is inside Russian territory and causing a shitstorm inside of Russia, by the way. Like, if there's a hot point for Russian commentators, it's that. They say, what the hell's going on here? Like, I don't care what's happening along the rest of the front. There are Ukrainians in our territory, and you're telling me we can't get rid of them? So that's a real thing. It's a real thorn in Russia's side. But if you remove that aspect, the entire rest of generally the east and the south, Russia has slowly been advancing in a couple different directions. It's slow. It's costly. Some prominent Russians are even saying, like, at this rate, we might be able to get to the Dnieper by 2028, which isn't even that far away in some locations. But they are making progress. And the recent areas to keep an eye on right now, one is Velika Novoselka in the south. That is a mouthful, but it probably rings a bell for people that were following the Ukrainian offensive last summer. This was a town that they took, small town, but Ukraine took it back from Russia, and it kind of signaled essentially like the peak of their advance. Like, it was kind of actually, that's not correct. It was a jumping off point that they took, and then they kind of pushed further into Russian territory. But it was at the center of the conversation around that counteroffensive. Not that it's a strategic location by any stretch, just it's in our memory. That right now is on the verge of being surrounded by Russian soldiers. There's a question how many Ukrainians remain as a rear guard and how many were able to evacuate. But what we're seeing over and over again is Russia, instead of, I mean, you remember at Bakhmut, they essentially ran, this is oversimplification, but it was a frontal assault. So they ran forward, and that's how Wagner lost so many of their convict soldiers. After Bakhmut, Russia largely changed their tactics and started doing more envelopments. So instead of going just directly at the enemy, they would come around the sides and kind of encircle from the back. And Ukraine's not getting trapped because the encirclements are taking a long time. But what they're having to do is fall out of that area to preserve manpower and equipment. And that's what we're seeing in Velika Novoselka right now. And we're starting to see it play out in Pokrovsk, a little further east. That is an issue. Pokrovsk is a strategic hub, as much as any has been so far in this war. It helps to supply a good chunk of the eastern front. And what we've seen Russia do in recent weeks, really, is they're continuing their offensive there, but they're starting to shift west and east to kind of come around the side and sever any connection into that city. So it's not good. Ukraine is having to fall back in multiple areas, albeit slowly, and they are exacting a toll on Russian forces. So looking at the tactical situation on the ground, not largely unchanged over the course of the last few months, I would say.
Interesting. And so do you think, I mean, is there a stop here? How can Ukraine stop the advance? Do they need more equipment? Do they not have enough manpower? Do they need to start drafting younger people?
That's the million-dollar question. Yes, would be the simple answer. All of the above is kind of the way to put it. But that then raises the question of, if Ukraine is up across the board, does Russia increase things across the board, right? They haven't had another round of mobilization. Maybe they need to tap into that. So there's not a clear answer as to what Ukraine would need to do to stop this. They have done a very good job at making it costly for Russia, which is, you can't discount that. There's been conversations recently about Ukraine not lowering the mobilization age to 18, but increasing recruitment of younger soldiers. So kind of targeting younger soldiers to find out like what would it get to get an 18-year-old, 19-year-old, 20-year-old to voluntarily sign up to go fight with a specific unit. So kind of targeted recruitment to try to pull more people into the force. But I mean, every one of those is a real challenge right now. From Russia's perspective, they're saying that the aid shipments don't matter because Ukraine is running out of people. Ukraine has definitely suffered a lot of losses. They've had a lot of people leave the country throughout the course of the war as well. It's not clear at this point that they're like on the verge of collapse at all. But yeah, any one of those things, if they see a shortage of incoming personnel into the military, if they see an increase in casualties, a reduction in mobilization, or a reduction in equipment, any one of those could, I wouldn't say force the Ukrainian lines to collapse, but we could see kind of see them whittled away at faster, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. And so here in our notes here, you had the filtration of Ukrainians. What's happening with that?
Yeah, man. So there was a long Twitter thread by somebody who was previously a resident of Mariupol. And filtration, the way to put this is some people were calling them concentration camps. That's not the right way to look at it. Think of a concentration camp as the end state for filtration. Filtration is you're filtering the population. So you're moving through a group of people and identifying where they should go and what their fate will be. So in Mariupol, this is an area that Russia took very quickly at the start of the war, outside of the steel plant, the Azovstal steel plant, where some defenders held out. A lot of the population quickly found themselves with Russians on all sides. So that population, tens of thousands, went through a filtration exercise where Russia pulled them out of their homes and decided to send them to different places. They were all marked with numbers. And this isn't new. We've known about this from the day that it happened. We're just starting to see more and more details. I should make that clear. And it's the kind of thing we've seen reported in any area where the Russians went in and were able to establish control relatively quickly. Because then they had the mechanisms to do this type of police action. And like, if you really want to sum it up, and I hate to, everything is not a comparison of World War II and the Holocaust, but like, think of rounding up the Jews in World War II. Mm-hmm. It's that type of filtration, right? You're going through a neighborhood. Nazi Germany comes in. They go through a neighborhood. They identify who are the people that are Jewish, who are the people helping the Jews, who are the ones helping the Allies, and you filter them out that way. That is the way to think about this. So they're looking for tattoos that might signify certain affiliations within the government or political parties or religious affiliations. They're going through people's phones to identify any contacts. They talked about some of these people that were sent off to work camps because their cousin was in the military 10 years ago.
Jesus.
It's awful. Like, they're looking to see, were there bruises in the pocket of their shoulder where they would fire a rifle? Does that mean that they could have been shooting Russian soldiers? Okay, send them to a work camp. It's not clear where a lot of these people ended up. Some of them were able to go into like indentured servitude, essentially, like slave labor. And some of them were able to save up enough money for a train ticket and they escaped, which is how we have some of these stories now. But, you're talking probably tens of thousands of people filtered through Ukraine into Russia.
That's brutal. And so they're essentially conducting a genocide to a certain extent. I mean, even if these people aren't being put to death, the legal definition of genocide is not death camps, right? It is essentially
maybe
what
ethnic cleansing. Would ethnic cleansing be a better term there? I don't know. Yeah.
Aren't they one and the same?
No, there is a difference there, but you get into some. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to stay away from both of those because I feel like there's very specific legal aspects.
Right.
These seem to fit at least one of those, right? Taking people forcibly from their land, filtering them into slave labor camps or indentured slavery in another country, separating them from their families. It seems like it checks at least a few of the boxes of things you should not do. But, yeah, that's a thing.
What can you expect from Russians? That's for sure. Yeah, what can you expect from Russians? It's you'd think there'd be. I know at the beginning of the war there's a lot of focus on it when it first started, but you don't really see a lot of that in the mainstream media anymore.
I don't think you see a lot about Ukraine in general in the mainstream media. So it's not that this story didn't make it out. It's that, like, what if you open like the New York Times or Wall Street Journal or anything right now, or even go to their digital versions, I wonder how far you have to go to find a story today about Ukraine. My guess is it's not front page. And when that happens, you start having to, if you think back to, and all this, Ben, I'm just kind of rambling here, but, at the start of the war, say the whole front page was covered with Ukraine news. So you've got 15 to 25 stories a day coming out of the conflict. As it went on, when that filters down to 10, all of a sudden there's 15 of those things not being told, right? There's still soldiers going on the offensive every single day, daring operations every single day, wild stories coming out of Ukrainians capturing Russian soldiers and things like that, special operations raids, massive drone strike last night, right? 150 drones or so launched into Russia. And according to the Russian Ministry of Defense, they shot them all down. And they just, who knows? I don't know why those oil refineries ended up burning on their own. Smoking accidents.
Of course, yeah.
Simultaneously, randomly.
It's an interesting thing about the media where I think like people act like they have an agenda, right? But the reality of it is that most newspapers, most news stations are captured by their audience, and they just follow what the audience wants. So as interest in Ukraine has gone down in the American consciousness, so do the stories. Now that's not to say news organizations do have an obligation to talk about things like this, right? To make people care about it. However, audience capture is very real, and that's just how it goes nowadays.
It's something we think about, right? I mean, for a long stretch after the October 7th attacks, especially after Israel went into Gaza, I was making daily update videos on YouTube. Here's what happened the last 24 hours in the war. And it got to the point where the views fell off. The videos weren't drastically different, but what was happening there had kind of changed. We kind of saw it transitioning into a sort of counterinsurgency type fight. And now there's a lot of factors at play. I know, right? Like maybe I stumble over my words too much in one video, or the thumbnail is awful, or who knows. But I could see it in real time. The interest in following what was happening in Gaza, for instance, just fell off. And like I, in my content then kind of transition from, instead of every day, here's the breakdown of the last 24 hours, it might be once a week, summarizing things. So like we're talking about it like how dare the mainstream media, but we see it as well.
Yep. Well, we live in the Amazon Prime era, as I call it. I remember it was June of 2022, and people were complaining that we're still reporting on the war because no one cared anymore. And like, how is this still going on? Now, it's the Amazon Primeification of America, where just attention spans do not last long. And although, to be fair, American involvement in World War II, granted, we were involved much earlier than the official narrative, right? Of course, with like the fighting the War of the Pacific, but we were only really in active combat in World War II for 3 years, and this war is going on 3 years now. So I guess in the defense of the American public, whose attention spans are rotting, our big war only lasted 3. However, Afghanistan went 20 years and Vietnam went 10. So
yeah, but nobody was paying attention to Afghanistan, Ben.
That's very true. That's very true. People forgot we were in Afghanistan at times. So, yep, you're right. You were right. So, shall we cut over here to the United States? Because we do have some more terrorist designations.
Yeah. Let's start with the southern border and then, you know what? Yeah, actually the FTO designation of the cartels, because we had a back and forth this week that I think is worth getting into.
Yeah.
About military deployments. But Trump designated cartels and other organizations, so yet to be named technically.
Right.
But they, I guess the Department of the Secretary of State, Homeland Security, DNI, maybe a couple others are supposed to come together pretty quickly here, I think 3 weeks, and lay out, maybe 2 weeks even, and lay out their proposals for what cartels largely are going to be labeled as foreign terror organizations. What that does is opens up a whole new toolbox available to the federal government. One of those is the use of military force. It technically could fall under that same authorization that back in 2001 that was enacted, that we've been fighting the global war on terror around the world, right? There's a reason that you'll hear about an airstrike in Somalia against Islamic State militants, and like that didn't go through Congress. It's because it was the AUMF that they're still using. that has been used not just for military action, but for a wide range of counterterrorism operations around the world that aren't necessarily kinetic. Seizing funds, seizing assets, arresting people, being able to interrogate terrorists or terrorist sympathizers around the world in places that it's not just Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, things like that. It's not just where we had boots on the ground. So it does open up a lot more resources on the financial side, on the legal side, on the intel side. But it also, I think, understandably so, kind of makes people think, are we going to war with the cartels?
Yes. And so here's my question for you. Do you think a terrorist designation for the cartels is effective? Because to me, the cartels definitely aren't. I mean, they act sometimes as terror groups, but terror groups are motivated by ideology. And they strike me more as like mobs, like the mafia almost, rather than a terrorist organization.
Organized crime over terrorism is what you're saying,
yeah.
right?
Do you think that this designation is fitting, or do you think it's just you only have a hammer, and so everything looks like a nail?
Closer to that hammer-nail analogy, but I think it kind of shows an issue with how we're structured right now, because the cartels are bad. They're doing bad things. They're causing a direct impact to American citizens. And to me, labeling them a foreign terrorist organization is just showing that, like, maybe we don't have the right tools available to effectively counter that. So what we do have available is this FTO designation. That's kind of how I'm viewing it right now.
I think it's going to be very difficult because the cartels, they're not just drugs, right? They're in everything. A lot of the avocados are either cartels control the farms, they're in charge of the exports, right? Like they've moved from drugs to other things as well. And so I think it's going to be a very hard fought battle, but I also think the other part everyone kind of glosses over is that there are American citizens in these cartels, and I think that's going to get the constitutionality of whatever they're planning on doing. It's going to make it really hard, right? Because there aren't very many. I'd be surprised if there's a single American citizen in the Houthis. But with the cartels, there are quite a lot. And I know Obama drone striked. I know they were talking about drone strikes, so they talked about limited strikes in Mexico on these. I know Obama did drone strike an American citizen once, and they used the justification through preemptive self-defense. But I don't know if you can do that this time around. I don't, not that I guess it matters, but anyway, speaking of that though, 10,000 U.S. Marines, equipped with air support and drones, and they are dressed fully for combat. That is what the news report says, are being deployed to the U.S. Mexico border, and they'll be on the border joining, every federal agency, and on top of Texas militia and border patrol and state police. So what's happening there? Because you and we texted this. I texted you. I said, this is going to sound crazy. I said, are we preparing for an invasion of Mexico? And the reason I asked this, because when you're looking at the news reports, it's like 10,000 Marines is a lot, right? Especially since, the U.S. Mexico border is big, but there are only like some places you can cross at. Like, of course, you could cross in Arizona, but like there are a lot of Jane Does and John Does that get found in that desert. It's a really rough crossing, right? But the Rio Grande in Texas, and also in California, the Baja, though no one really crosses there much anymore. But the Texas one's big, and 10,000 is a lot, right? And having air support and drones, and I don't know. It made me wonder. I was like, this seems really odd. So what do you think here? Are we going to invade Mexico, or do you think they are just there to assist and there's no other nefarious means behind it? Because I feel, here's what I'll say. There would definitely be more reporting, more leaks if an invasion was in the cards, right? The Trump administration and also just the way the United States is set up would not allow for a surprise attack like Putin would do. You would find out ahead of time. Yeah,
part of the challenge here is we don't know the in-state goal. So it's hard to, when we say invasion of Mexico, I think sometimes folks are thinking like we got troops pushing down into Cancun and the Yucatan
Right.
and establishing strong points, but like 10,000 is clearly not going to do that. 10,000, is there an intent to go into Mexican sovereign territory? I don't know. Does it do any, like, if you look at a lot of the border crossings, does it do any good if we just put troops on the other side of the border? Probably not. I don't know. Does that solve a problem? Like, if there's a fence and we've got, like, and we move troops 2 kilometers into Mexico,
Into
does that, like,
Mexico? Yeah.
I don't know. This isn't me, like, pushing back on it. It's, does that actually solve anything versus them just being on the U.S. side of that border? At some of the border checkpoints, I guess I could understand that argument if the argument was being made that Mexico is, like, abdicating their duties and just, like, letting everybody through, like, fuck it, we don't care, just come on in. But there's really not any indications of that either. I think Mexico's kind of picked up their monitoring of the border as well. So I have a hard time getting behind any, like, yeah, there's going to be an invasion of Mexico. What comes to mind for me is, so I was in the Texas Army National Guard when we lived down there, and we had a couple things there. The Texas Army National Guard does a lot of kind of permanent border missions where they rotate troops through at the border because obviously Texas has a massive border with Mexico. And then a lot of the guys in our unit were, we had a lot of Border Patrol guys that were also National Guard. So we kind of heard both sides, or not both sides, but a lot of different angles of this issue. Now, this was back in 2017, 18, so things have changed a little bit. But a couple things that I took from that was, first off, the designated workers that we have at the border are overwhelmed. There's far more for them to do than we have people available. And I think that's pretty well known, like the argument for more Border Patrol agents. So they always had more on their plate than they could handle, and it wasn't close. The military support, as it was structured then, and this is always something that can change, the military support was never in apprehending immigrants. Most of them, I believe, did not carry weapons. They were simply assisting the Border Patrol people. So they might help with logistics. They might be on the supply side, administration, communications, medical maybe, essentially doing a bunch of things to allow the Border Patrol agents to go patrol the border. The caveat there is that can change with executive orders and orders from the president to where you can put, and that's one of the arguments as to this executive order declaring a state of emergency, that I believe could open up the military to be used in more of a law enforcement sense, to where you could have military personnel actually trying to stop people from crossing the border. That gets really tricky. I mean, we don't have to get too hypothetical here. Look at Iraq and Afghanistan. Our military is built to and designed and they train to fight and win wars against armed adversaries. So like we are not well trained to build nation states. We are not well trained to enforce a border. Now that can happen because, troops are malleable and they'll figure out a way to accomplish that mission if need be. But the idea that you could take an infantry battalion and put them on the border and they would be effective at immediately effective at finding the ways to, how do you navigate this? Who do you talk to? What are the rules of engagement? It gets really messy really quickly. It could be used though. We do have, it's a lot of well-trained individuals that could be used in that sense. It would require a little bit of retraining, re-equipping. They'd have to learn a whole new level of rules of engagement. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. That's kind of where I lean, is probably a lot of direct support to Border Patrol with the overall mission still falling under Homeland Security.
Yes. So in terms of this time around, I believe the Marines do have weapons. They are not unarmed. And I will say, within 90 days, the President Trump will decide whether or not to invoke the Insurrection Act and the Invasion Act, or not the Invasion. There's a word for it. Posse Comitatus, something like that. So the Insurrection Act allows the military to act as law enforcement, and which is what they would be at the border, but also Posse Comitatus is a president can, announce an invasion. The United States has had we've had a very calm, peaceful existence, and that we've never been invaded outside of like 1812, right? So, and we started that one, so it happens. But he's gonna try to declare an invasion, and that's gonna be lawsuits there. But that's coming within 90 days. So I agree with you. We're not going to push down to the Yucatan, conquer Mexico City. Maybe an incursion. I don't know what an incursion does. We do know that in late December, the Trump team was talking about a limited incursion into Mexico. Reasons unclear as to why, but we do know that they were talking about it. So the question is, you're right, 10,000 Marines is not enough for a limited incursion. However, who knows what they're thinking, right? And so I generally agree with you here. It'll be interesting to see what happens, because I know the 10,000 Marines are just the immediate. He's supposedly sending significantly more. And I don't know if you can declare and invade the, posse comitatus with migrants. And I think it'll probably go to the Supreme Court. And to be real with you, I think the Supreme Court will maybe rule with Trump because, I think John Roberts is just going to say, I defer to the commander-in-chief as to what an invasion is. I think that makes the most sense, even if maybe it's not on paper an invasion. But that is, the circumstances surrounding all of it is the Invasion Act, insurrection. They do have weapons, and they talked about limited incursion into Mexico. But you're right. I don't know what the incursion fixes or doesn't fix. It just seems like, I don't know. Maybe it's just a move for leverage or something.
Let's take that incursion thing out, because I think we have to get through too many hypotheticals. And again, we don't have an idea of what the actual goal is, so it's hard to dial that in. But I think something that's missed a lot when we look at military units here is we immediately jump to lethal force. And we're looking at how would a tank be used on the southern border? And there's only one way you would do that. Or how would a Hellfire missile be used? And Hellfire missiles do one thing, right? They kill people. So when we hear that Marines are moving down there and they're armed and they're bringing everything they have and they have air support, I think a lot of the thoughts go towards violence. But there's a lot of things the military can bring to bear. Look at the National Guard support for any natural disaster, right? They're not shooting those hurricanes. They're not dropping bombs on the tsunamis. They're using their chain of command, their ability to coordinate with other agencies, their personnel, simply boots on the ground, and their vehicles to support the mission at hand. So if you look at some areas along the border, it might not be infantrymen conducting arrests, but a Marine company, for instance, has a lot of drones. They have a lot of long-range surveillance equipment, and they have a lot of means of setting up, barriers, essentially, to kind of monitor maybe a long stretch of the border that maybe they're not doing the arresting, but they can then call out when something is happening or provide real-time updates or transportation. So there's a lot that they can do that's well short of actually asking one of our troops to shoot and kill Mexican migrants that are crossing the border. So, it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yes, absolutely. Also, little correction: Posse Comitatus is not the invasion thing. It is. I had it mixed. It's basically the Insurrection Act. It allows U.S. troops to enforce domestic policies in the United States.
Gotcha.
I don't think he can. He could, but yeah. So. Just a brief point of correction. I do agree with you, though. But what do you see happening here with, do you see drone strikes? Do you see shooting happening? Or do you think Marines just going to go sit down there like every other National Guard that's been sent and just be really
I'm not well-versed enough in a lot of that down there. My understanding at this point is that drone strikes would be rather ineffective because these are a lot like insurgent organizations where you take out one and there's other people able to step in and fill the gaps. And something we learned throughout the War on Terror is a drone campaign by itself is not effective. It needs to be a massive, overwhelming drone campaign followed up with some sort of support on the ground to provide an alternative to whatever it is they were doing. So a drone strike here or there, I guess maybe it could happen because that's a good headline event. But if we're actually talking about making change down there, I don't think it's going to be done through Reapers and Hellfire missiles. So We'll see. It's something I'm going to try to read up more on here in the coming days and weeks, just get a better understanding of. I mean, the cartels are serious, man. This is, it's kind of two sides. Where I saw somebody the other day say they're old enough to remember that when we went to the war with the Taliban, people were saying, "Look, be careful. The Taliban have been fighting for years. They're hardened warriors." And then a couple dudes on horseback and with air support essentially ran them out of the country in a few weeks. So it's like, all right, maybe we overestimated the Taliban in that sense. So we have to be careful to not to kind of appropriately assess the risk that any sort of military action there would take. But I don't know. I don't have anything to go off here. My gut says that we're not going to see direct military action with the cartels anytime soon. I don't know. Maybe that's my hope. I don't know.
No, I'm with you. I know in the first term he tried to, and he suggested that we shoot Patriot missiles at them, and then claimed that we had no idea where they were coming from, and which is like the
Patriot missiles. Did he say Patriots?
He said Patriot missiles. Which to the listeners who don't know, that is a surface-to-air missile. And there aren't very many of them around the world. So if a Patriot missile is landing in Mexico, I think there's one suspect you could put it to, even though he says they won't know. But speaking of Mexico, the Gulf of Mexico, Donald Trump issued an executive order renaming it to the Gulf of America. And now the Coast Guard refers to it as the Gulf of America. The entire federal government refers to the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America.
Really? I didn't know that. Okay.
Yep, and the state of Florida does as well. It's a whole thing.
Wait,
and
is it that easy? Is it that easy to do that? Like you can just
you just sign an executive
order.
It's
that easy to change a name?
Well, so only we call it that. The UK has said they're not going to recognize it. So the rest of the world will call it the Gulf of Mexico, and we will call it the Gulf of America, at least for the next 4 years. In which I imagine this term will probably end pretty badly, and there'll be like a reversion to the norms. So yeah, we call it the Gulf of America now. He also renamed Mount Denali to Mount McKinley because he's a big McKinley guy. He gave us 8 minutes of McKinley talk during his inaugural speech, which is really something. But interestingly about McKinley is there are a lot of similarities between Trump and McKinley. McKinley was a businessman before he was the president, and he was also a huge tariff guy, and he also expanded the territory of the United States, two things Trump said he was going to do. But a lot of historians think Trump misses the point about McKinley because McKinley was a big tariff guy, right, Preston? And then he said, well, it seems like tariffs aren't really helping the United States grow, and they don't really work, so he became a big free trade guy. And that was his whole thing, and then he was assassinated, and Teddy Roosevelt became the youngest president in history. Interestingly, J.D. Vance, younger than Teddy Roosevelt was when he became the vice president. So J.D. Vance is 40 years old. If something happens to Trump, he'll be the youngest president in history, at least for the next 2 years. So a lot of interesting comparisons there. McKinley, there were a couple assassination attempts on him, and of course he was assassinated. But yeah, so in honor of his, not his mentor, they didn't meet, but in honor of his hero, he renamed Mount Denali to Mount McKinley, and those were the two big name changes. Mount Denali is in Alaska, if you don't know. So,
wait, hold on though, and I don't. Maybe this might end up being a really stupid question, but like, you're telling me all it takes to rename something in the United States is the president just says so?
I guess. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can't like rename
if
state.
If Trump were to decide to say, Trump's like, I don't like the word Rocky. That's a stupid name. They're now known, instead of the Rocky Mountains, as the Trump Mountains. Like, he could just do that and sign that, and like, would that, like, that's a thing? Like, just that fast? It feels like there's got to be something involved there, right?
I mean, you just say, he just signed an executive order that says the federal government will now call it the Gulf of America. And that's
I see no way that could be abused at all.
Well, like, we haven't had anyone like him before, right? Like, I mean, for the most part, like, they've all, like, we've had corrupt presidents in the past. They've, of course, probably all of them are narcissists. But, like, none of them to, like, go this far. I think maybe do you think he renames a state by the end of it? I mean,
rename another country. What do you want to call North Korea? Like, We rename Russia.
I mean,
I kind of a part of me kind of likes this.
I mean, I guess. I think it's like really, you know what it feels like? Do you remember when Bush won the second term and then you had all these like Idiocracy was a movie and of course the not the Today Show, like the Comedy Central shows kind of mocking the whole thing. It really feels to me like a parody you'd see on The Onion, like renaming the Gulf of America, renaming random things to whoever he wants. It very much feels like something out of a parody movie. But yeah, apparently he can do this. And people are calling it the Gulf of America now. It's not changed on Apple Maps. I don't think it will be. It's like the UN designated name, and it's called the Gulf of Mexico because of the Mexican basin beneath it, and also it's called that because that's just what Spanish explorers said when they arrived. And it turns out when you arrive someplace first, you get to kind of just call it whatever you want. So maybe he should get to Mars fast and he can call it Trump or whatever he wants to.
Oh, yeah, we're doing that, right?
We are going to Mars. But another interesting thing about the Gulf of America is that it has provoked a lot of ridicule, and that the president of Mexico said, all right, we're just going to call America now Mexican America. And Trump has not responded to, I believe her name is Claudia Sheinbaum, right? And he has not responded to her yet, but that is what's happened there. And the tariffs, though, have been postponed till February 1st. He previously pledged that he would do them on day one, but he kind of chickened out. I mean, I'm not trying to tease him here because I hope he doesn't do that, but he said that happened February 1st. He hasn't done it. But China did something. I don't know what it did. Maybe they bought some of his coin or something, but their tariffs went from 60 to 10%, and now Canada and Mexico's tariffs have gone from 10% to 25%. So now Canada and Mexico pay higher tariffs than China. And Canada has made threats about shutting off oil to us, and natural gas. They're our largest natural gas and oil importer, so that is not great for us. They're also the largest exporter of electricity to us. So it's hard to say if he'll actually gain the courage to do these wide-sweeping general tariffs rather than targeted, but we'll see. I mean, he's an interesting guy, you know. Did you watch him signing the executive orders?
No. There's been a bunch of those at this point where like he did some on stage, right, and some in the office. Yeah, I didn't watch that. I saw clips.
He did something I thought was very electric. You know, when a president signs executive order, he signs like a bill. He usually does it. There are like multiple copies, and he does it with a different pen each time, and he hands the pens to like the lawmakers who help make it possible. And Trump,
he was throwing them into the crowd, right?
He's throwing them in the crowd. I was like, that's crazy. I was like, that's electrifying. Yeah, I was like, all right. But signing them on stage was crazy. But every president, you know, they do the executive order their first night, and so that's what he was doing in the Oval Office. And he was telling stories. It was charming. But they had one, and it's been memed to high hell. He goes, all right, what's this executive order? And he goes, they say, leaving the World Health Organization. He goes, ooh, that's a big one. And then signs it and passes it over. I'm just like, oh, God. But anyways, the United States, I believe, is now the only nation, or we're the only nation along with Yemen, not in the World Health Organization anymore. We've also left the Paris Climate Accords as well. So the international, or what do we call it, the rules-based international order is on pause for like a little bit now. We'll see what ends up happening. But what do you think of the first week of the Donald?
As chaotic as expected, I'll say. I tell you what, I like when our adversaries are a little confused, don't like what's going on. It's been wonderful seeing Russia kind of waffling on like, we don't know if we like this guy or not. This is not what we thought we were getting. I do like that. I like the handful of items in my realm of the world I think are a net positive. I think the labeling of cartels, FTO, probably opens up some better tools for us to use against that threat than we've had in the past. I like the same thing with the Houthis. I'd like to see that head in the right direction. Those are the big ones. And then, just utter confusion on what's going to happen in Ukraine. But it's hard to beat at this point a threatening note to Putin. I don't think a lot of people were expecting that. In at least the camp of folks that were supportive of Ukraine, I don't think would have expected a Trump truth threatening Putin on day 2 or something.
Agreed. I agree. I'm glad to see that Russia's waffling. I'll be interested to see what happens with North Korea. Because during Trump's executive orders, he said that they have a lot of great real estate, a really great coastline. They could have so many condos there. And I was just like, all right. He's a real estate guy. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. But, yeah, for the most part, you're right. Chaotic. It's good to see Russia waffling. Of course, we're not going to get into domestic politics here. We try to stay out of it. So we're not going to get into any of the executive orders that are controversial, or some like them, some hate them. Who cares? But yeah, what else do you have on the agenda? I mean, we're out of things on our list here, but where else is on your mind, Mr. Preston?
I want to see for the viewers if what's the thing that we should be renaming? If Trump has the authority to just rename whatever he wants, a state or a river, a mountain range, a country. I feel like we should use that and maybe put together some petitions and get them pushed up the chain. So let us know what needs to be, what's the best renaming to go about.
Right? Maybe he could rename the Gulf of America. Sounds really dumb. Maybe just like the Gulf of Texas, because doesn't Texas have most of the coastline there? I don't know. Do you see? I mean, Marco Rubio got approved, 99 votes, right? Yep. Awesome.
Do you know the one that didn't vote? You know who that was? Was it him?
I think it's him.
Because I kept hearing people say he could get 100 votes, and I guess that meant that there would be because he couldn't. Wait, would he vote for himself? Could he vote for himself?
That's fine. I'll Google it right now.
Because his replacement would not be in until he was appointed.
Right. So let's see.
I'm interested in the one that opted out.
So no, Rubio voted for himself. So there are just only 99 senators. Let's see. Someone's missing.
Did Vance not vote? Because he's.
Oh,
what about that one? Is it Vance because has his spot been filled?
It is Vance. He does not have anyone to fill his spot yet. So yeah, it is Vance. So he could not get 99. You're right.
So we should interpret this as the new vice president does not support the Secretary of State. Is that what you're telling me?
I guess so. Yeah, it's he did not sign off on this. But he got 99 yeses all across the board. And usually for some of these things, sometimes people don't show up. They vote no just for the sake of it. But everyone seems to believe in Marco, and props to him. And I'm a Marco guy. I like Marco, and we'll see how that goes. Pete Hegseth, we're not going to get into it, but he narrowly passed committee, and now he'll go to the Senate floor. Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski defected during the committee vote, and now Mitch McConnell says he will not vote for him, which in 2 years ago, that would have been, the death sentence, right? Mitch was like, go with you, but Mitch isn't the leader anymore. It's John Thune, and so it seems like J.D. Vance will come in and break the tie unless someone else defects. Who's to say? But that's happening there. And we have a new head of the CIA. John Radcliffe was also approved. 75 to 25, or not 75 to 24. And so that's exciting. He says he's going to be non-political. He's just going to do his job as the head of the CIA, which is what I think you'd expect the CIA to say. And yeah, that's interesting. Although there's some drama in the CIA. Did you see some of this drama?
No, maybe.
So,
I don't know.
The CIA is, the Trump administration got rid of what they're calling diversity initiatives, DEI stuff. And the CIA is, there's some drama inside the agency because, the reason the CIA is so strong is because of that diversity, right? Not every spy could be a 6'5" Ken doll, right? They all need to, you need people who look the part. And so these DEI initiatives apparently also apply to the National Clandestine Service, which is not great, right? We know one of the reasons they caught bin Laden was because they were Pakistani women, on the ground in Pakistan who were CIA agents, part of the National Clandestine Service, who just blended in because they were Pakistani. They looked the part. And so, yeah, there's some drama in the clandestine service and CIA where people are saying, if any agency has any reason to hire people on the basis of their gender and race, it is us, the CIA, and they're being told to stop that. And apparently a reporter said they've also been told not to celebrate Black History Month, which is interesting and just feels needlessly provocative, right? So we'll see how that pans out. As you know, Trump and the CIA do not get along. They do not like each other. The CIA and Trump were fine the first 2 years, and then they started to leak against him after they told him Mohammed bin, the Saudi prince killed.
Bin Salman?
Bin Salman killed Jamal Khashoggi, murdered him, and embassy in Turkey. And Trump said, well, we don't know who did it. And the CIA then began leaking against Trump because they told him, here's the audio recording. We have him ordering it. We have him watching it. So it'll be interesting to see how Trump v. CIA goes this time around. But also speaking of the CIA, he declassified JFK's, RFK, and MLK's assassination files via executive order. So in the next 15 days, they need to provide a plan to declassify them, and then they will eventually be declassified. And we'll see what happens there. Do you think the official narrative's right, or what do you think is going to come out? Do you think you're going to find out, there was a second shooter? Or are you going to be like, disappointingly, what we knew is correct?
Not something I've followed a lot. I spent a lot of time on, but knowing how conspiratorial these have gone, I kind of have a feeling that it's going to be an underwhelming release. And then I wonder how that's going to be received. If the release is underwhelming and people have built up for decades that there's some big secret here, then what? Is it going to be a cover up? Right? Like, we'll see. That'll be interesting. That'll be a news cycle or two, huh?
Right. I think if I had to guess, and maybe I'm wrong, I think it's going to be very boring. I don't think you're going to find out anything. Although maybe there'll be something about Lee Harvey Oswald we didn't previously know. But yeah, so that's that. Anything exciting? Any good jokes?
Nothing here, man. I think we're probably good to wrap up.
Yeah. So we'll wrap, folks. Remember, if you like this, like, comment, subscribe. Also, there was a controversy we ignited because we started uploading clips, and we've heard you loud and clear. We will not post clips anymore. We'll create a clips channel, or we'll figure something out. But you've been heard loud and clear, and we apologize for the confusion, and we'll get that fixed. So, but if you like this, give it a like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what Trump should rename next. Do now that he knows that he can just declare federal holidays, as you saw with Joe Biden did with Jimmy Carter, he should, if Trump starts abusing the federal holiday power, he'd be the most popular president in America. He's just like, I think I really like America this week, so everyone's going to get a 4-day weekend, right? It would be electrifying. I mean, that's what we need in this country, truly.
Rocking those votes for
whoever's
votes next, yeah.
Yeah, so, anyways, like, comment, subscribe, and follow. And thank you for watching, and we'll see you next week. Also, I know last episode we said Donald Trump would be on. He has prior commitments, but he's coming on next week. So tune in for that, and we'll see you next time.